Whenever I talk about innovation, I think one of the things I always say is there's an element of the regulators coming in early on when you're trying to build out an innovation in a region and putting the foundations in place, like consumer protection and consumer duty, but then stepping away for the innovators to kind of do their magic and grow those products and features and innovation that they need in the market, and then coming back in when it's quite mature and building out that framework to be a stronger framework. So if you look at Dodd-Frank and what it's trying to achieve in the US, quite fragmented market with the federated approach they've got in the US already around payments. So it's attempting to achieve that kind of cohesive data-driven platform that really sets a foundation for open finance. So I would imagine the same for you, along with UK, and for us to kind of collectively look at creating that profound kind of data platform where people can innovate on top. And think about things like, ChatGPT, technologies that can really use that kind of large language models that we can create with this capability and build on top some exciting products that we can offer as finance products.
Absolutely amazing, yeah, and it kind of speaks to just how much has changed since PSD2. You bring up generative AI, and I know a lot of people that were working on it were fully aware of its capabilities, but I think a lot of people in the industry weren't ready for how widespread that would be. And now that the consumers are used to that level of technology, we're now having to keep up with the consumer demand, which is so exciting. And Nida, I'd love to get your perspective as well, because one thing that the European Union and regulators seem to be very keen on, that kind of Anu was bringing up, was looking at protection. And I'd love to see your insight into like what they could do to enable vulnerable customers to either be educated more, and really, is this the time that we can help reduce fraud, for instance?
Yeah, good question. Actually relates to one of the audience questions as well. So if I can, I'll try to cover them all together. I think the question was around whether the European public really understands what all of this means, right? So as at first, I think I would say, PSD and PSD2 were great at pushing the banks to do better, and that allowed a lot of innovative services and better fraud protections to be released to the market, and consumers really benefited from that, right? I think the onus is, and all of us, we speak about it so much, we're kind of almost in our own echo chambers a bit. We all agree with each other, we get it, we know we need it, but we have a responsibility to also educate the wider public so that they understand, and vulnerable customers is one of them. So obviously United Kingdom's doing a bit more with consumer duty, etc., coming in, with other regulations coming in around APP fraud. And I know that PSD3 will, of course, take that forward as well, and they'll look at implementing some of that on their side. But I do think there could potentially be more that can be done on the education front. I don't think people will fully understand or grapple yet what benefit could come to them through this symphony of regulation, as Brian called it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to then, after that, go to the man who came up with a piece of prose himself and see, yeah, what one thing do you think the EU regulators could do to help this development?
So, like the EU is actually pretty good at listening to the market. So there's a lot of engagement, So, we're members of the Open Finance Association. We really feel we're getting heard, and and I think it's so that's first of all really really impressive. The trick is to kind of figure out, okay, well, what do you actually want to kind of regulate, and what do you want to leave to the market? And you've seen some parts of the world where a greater proportion of the stack, let's say, was prescribed. So standards were more clear, maybe user experience guidelines were a bit more prescriptive, maybe not fully prescriptive, but at least the bar was set at a minimum. And that's allowed those countries usually to kind of get adoption a bit faster. Now you don't want regulation everywhere. You want to leave enough competitive space above that. But certainly, you can see that the markets that have kind of moved faster were a bit clearer in what they want. And in fairness, actually, I think the split of PSD2 into a directive and a regulation is a very kind of clear indication that the EU has learned from the past, and doesn't want to have so much fragmentation across each country. So the regulation obviously applies universally, and you pick and choose the kind of elements where you want to have local discretion, but maybe not in the more technical logistical stuff, because then consumers don't understand it. So I think that's that's a positive sign, and if we can keep having those kind of feedback loops, then we'll be well served, I think.
Now, I mean, with that, if I could have, I guess, Piers, if I could come to you then, and we've heard some really impressive elements from the European Union, but we actually had a viewer chime in and say, does the EU bureaucracy actually get in the way of financial services innovation? I'm firing quite a feisty question towards you, especially after we've heard Brian say how elegant it can be, and how they've had a nuanced approach now. Do you think there's going to be an element where the UK can actually kind of keep up and maybe even go ahead?
Potentially. I think this comes back to the comment earlier, from a competitive perspective. I think, look, obviously the benefit of the 27 member states all being bound by at least a directive to start with, allows for that change to be progressed across a very, very wide range and number of end customers in a huge number of areas, despite the fact that that they are all within the EU, within the EA, or the SEPA region. That I think when you look at the elapsed time, that can sometimes mean that certain changes may take longer, will take longer to actually be fully adopted by all of the different players and customers within all of those different regions. But there is obviously the benefit that cohesion actually does allow those changes to be brought to a huge number of end customers across a very, very large